Welcome to the Ranch Workforce Project, a limited series collaboration between the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and Montana State University's Dan Scott Ranch Management Program, a project to address the domestic labor shortage on farms and ranches, a project to replenish the pipeline, a project to attract new people into an old industry, a project to face what has to change from within. Because the future of agriculture doesn't just depend on land and livestock, it depends on people. And now, your host, Haylie Shipp.
And welcome back to the Ranch Workforce Project, joined again today by Dr. Rachel Frost with the Dan Scott Ranch Management Program at Montana State University. Today we're diving into a topic that we haven't fully unpacked yet in this series, and that is wages. Not just what we pay, but the full compensation package. And to help us do that, we are joined by McKenzie Rojas. She brings a perspective that is both deeply rooted in the cattle industry and increasingly influential across it. Now, McKenzie is a fourth-generation cattlewoman who has been immersed in this business from the start. From her family's background in cattle to her dad's work as an order buyer to earning her degree in animal science and going on to work in large-scale feed yard operations with JBS Five Rivers, she has seen this industry from just about every angle. She's also built her own operation, launching a heifer development program and direct-to-consumer beef business, while continuing to work day-to-day in the industry alongside her husband. So she understands both sides of this conversation, the employer and the employee. But what has really set McKenzie apart is what she's done beyond the ranch. Through her platform, Arrow M Cattle Company on Facebook, she has built a strong and growing following by saying some of the things that people in agriculture are thinking but don't always say out loud. Conversations around wages, expectations, turnover, and transparency. Topics that can feel uncomfortable but are absolutely critical. And that is exactly why we're excited to have her here with us. As we get going, we're just going to jump right into it with McKenzie, starting off by talking about the fact that when you're paying in agriculture, it really is a full compensation package.
So this could end up getting pretty long-winded. So when people are looking to hire on, they need to take into consideration everything that the employer offers. On the flip side, the employer needs to completely and totally evaluate where they're at and what they're able to offer and what they require from the employee. I think a lot of times communication and transparency kind of get a little bit muddled. And so that's where a lot of frustration comes from both sides of the fence. And so I think overall as an industry, we all need to do better. But that being said, part of what we need to do or what an employer needs to do, they need to decide, are we hiring for an entry level position or are we needing somebody to fill multiple roles? And then from there, what does that package need to look like? I also think from the employee side, they need to be very honest with themselves and understand their limitations and the value that they bring when they do hire on. And from there, that conversation needs to be discussed. Something that I kind of see, and I follow Ranch World Ads. I also follow several of the hiring groups on, or in search of groups on Facebook. You're going to pay an intern differently than what you're going to pay a man and a wife that have two or three or four kids. You're going to pay somebody that's single that has limited experience differently than what you're going to pay that man with the family that carries a lot of different hats, even if his wife doesn't contribute. So, kind of the industry standard that I am seeing, and you have to take into consideration that it's going to vary by state and by region because cost of living can be vastly different across the United States. Something that I typically see is that intern or that single guy that has very limited experience They may make more along the lines of $2,500 a month, housing, ranch pickup, that kind of thing. That family may require bigger housing, maybe not a one-room apartment on the side of the barn or whatever. Mm. They are gonna require better housing. They're probably gonna look at a salary somewhere between 3,500 to 4,000. And then depending on the capacity of the individual that you're hiring, that compensation can look vastly different. I have seen people who come in with very limited knowledge about the industry as a whole, and all they care about is, well, what kind of package are you going to offer me by way of horse allowance? Then I've seen other individuals hire on and ask about things as far as what about heifer retention packages, or what about feeder cattle packages, things like that. So really and truly, what it all boils down to is the region in which you're working in, what the employer has the capacity to offer, the type of employee that they're needing, because some employers they can hire somebody with a little less knowledge and train them up in the way that they need them to be, versus there may be somebody ready to get out of retirement and need somebody completely, totally, and fully capable to take it over so that they can kind of step back.
I think one thing, Mackenzie, that as we were talking about this topic, you mentioned that ranch compensation, oftentimes you're not adding to the dollar amount that somebody's actually getting in their check, but what you're doing is reducing their expenses. And that's part of the package that maybe doesn't look as flashy and as sexy as you're talking and trying to compare what you're making compared to somebody else. But when you look at that final line, you're actually doing pretty well.
Right, absolutely. And a lot of those can be horse allowances. We all know that groceries are outrageously priced right now. So are you looking at getting a quarter of a beef, a half a beef, or a whole beef a year? That helps with grocery validity. What about ranch pickup? Can I use it for my personal use? A ranch trailer. We live in a From personal experience, we live in a location right now where we have a really nice indoor arena. I have really nice trained cow horses and ranch horses. Am I allowed to take the truck and trailer that we use for the ranch up to the arena? We don't personally, because I have my own equipment, but if I didn't have my own equipment, that would be a part of the questions. Housing, what does it look like? What about a 401k, health insurance? You know, all of those kind of things. What basically, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but basically, what kind of things do you offer me or my family for me to move across state or cross country or whatever that may not be in a dollar amount?
Well, Mackenzie, you mentioned housing, and I think that's such an important part of ranch work, but it's also this kind of interesting dynamic because in most industries, we're not asked to live where we work, but ranching is unique that way. So, where you choose to work is most of the time where you choose to live. And then you also don't get to choose your own house. That is given to you. You're living in houses that maybe match your bedroom stipulation that you'd like to have 3 bedrooms. But that's about all the say that you get in the layout of that place and its location as well. So, and I was also talking to a ranch manager actually just yesterday about this, that housing is included in your salary and it's a great benefit. It reduces that cost. But at the same time, when you get ready to retire, you haven't been building equity in a house as if you were making those payments. So, can you talk about that and how a young person might want to keep that in mind going into this profession and thinking about, oh, housing's provided. That means they don't have to worry about it now. But what does that look like down the road when you have been 30 years on a job and you have no equity in the house that you've been living in? Perhaps. Not that anybody stays 30 years in the same job anymore, but yeah.
One of the best lines of advice I was ever given was, even if you're provided employee housing, put back like you are paying a mortgage every month. Put back like you're paying utilities every month, because you don't know. You can look at my face and tell. People can get on my Facebook and see my story. But you don't know when a major accident's going to happen. You don't know when you're going to have to stop working completely and totally. You may not be able to retire. You may have to stop what you're doing at the age of 40 or 45, or you may get to live and do this lifestyle for the same employer for the next 20, 25 years, 30 years. But at the end of that, what do you have? Are you going to be able to leave where you're at and afford a place to live? Or did you just blow it on whatever else all those years? Or did you, invest it wisely? So
McKenzie, as you've now gathered this following of folks from across the country, and you gave some numbers, but obviously that is going to vary greatly depending on location because everybody regionally has a different sort of base type salary. We just talked about housing. You always hear it's a buyer's market or a seller's market. If you're looking at this industry right now of folks that are either needing employees for agriculture or people that are looking for ranches to go work for, who do you think has the upper hand right now? Are there more ranches looking for employees or more employees looking for positions?
truthfully, I think it's kind of neutral. I think we're kind of in a standoff position right now where employers are starting to get a little bit disgruntled because they're having high turnover rates. And so employees are like, well, I need a position that offers X, Y, and Z with X, Y, and Z culture behind it where I can be long term and create a family and stability. And so you have this weird dynamic right now where there are a lot of job openings. So you would think that the employees have an upper hand because then the job market would essentially be open and a free for all. But at the same time, it's one of those situations where it's like, but why are these positions open? And you can kind of, if you've been in this business any amount of time and you do kind of pay attention to Ranch World ads and all the Facebook groups, you will kind of start noticing a pattern. You will see the employers who post every fall after fall works. You will see a certain type of wording, for lack of a better term, in these job postings, and they typically are easy to spot and are easy red flags. So I do think that it may lean more towards the employees having the upper hand, but I kind of feel like it's a little bit neutral because at the end of the day, these employees still need jobs. And cowboy culture is not one of those cultures where it's like, I'm just going to go get a job in town today. Those guys don't work like that. There have been situations and times where I wish it did for us personally, but it doesn't work that way. So the employers know that if the employees get hungry enough, they're going to come looking for a job, even if in 6 months or a year they're going to leave, you know.
Just in our previous episode, we talked to JD Hill and Caroline Wild, and part of that discussion was on the identity of being a rancher and how much is tied up into that. So, yeah, you don't just, in this case, Caroline had gone on and now she's doing her own thing. It's not an active role on one ranch. And she said, when do I stop calling myself a rancher? Because you just have that identity that's tied up into it. So you're very much echoing what we've had previously. I had just shared our local tribal ranch on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, which is just east of my house. is looking for right now a ranch and or farm hand to help on their place. They've got 50,000 plus acres. They have about 2,000 acres of irrigated hay ground. They run this whole thing, it looks like, with 4 employees, and the two farms are 16 miles apart. So it's big country. But they just cracked me up because one of their bonus points, they said, don't say, oh my word, it's bluey when you see a blue heeler. And so they were doing this with some humor as they were putting this listing together. Uh, McKenzie, do you have any tips for a ranch that might be looking for a quality employee as to maybe what benefits to hype up that are the most important, or different ways to word things to attract the correct audience that they're after?
I'm the world's worst at wording on the fly. So all these
Fair.
things that I write and I post on Facebook, I sit on them for weeks sometimes. And so sometimes I'll get ready to post something and then I have to go back over it. So just bear with me. But I think for the employers, what like I said earlier, they really need to evaluate where they're at and what they need. Um A one okay, so, like, one thing that I touched on this last week has been horses and the compensation packages associated with such. I think that horses are a really great way for employees to be able to put in a little bit of sweat equity and get a pretty decent return. That being said, you'll see a lot of these job postings where we're only allowed 2 horses. We'll feed and shoe 2 horses, okay. Well, actually saw your job posting this morning when I was scrolling and drinking coffee, and I saw that and it caught my eye. Um, and I'm gonna use that as an example, but you've got 4 employees and you've got 50,000 acres. It's gonna probably take more than 2 horse to do the job, right? So, what does that need to look like? Do they have their own remuda? Do they have their own horse program? Um, Same thing for the guys down in Arizona. A lot of the folks from the Sand Hills or from the Southeast will go down to Arizona thinking that they wanna be on the wagon for 6 or 8 weeks, and find out real quick that their horses don't have enough bottom to make it in that kinda country. And a lot of those ranches down there actually have their own remuda that are bred specifically for that area, that are born and raised there on the rocks, that have a pretty decent and big gas tank. And I wanna talk about that because a lot of these guys will see, okay, well, they do have their own horse program, or they do offer X, Y, and Z by way of horses, but that doesn't really benefit me. So, what I like for employers to think about is maybe some sort of compensation package as far as that's concerned. If I've got these guys riding 50, 60, 100 head of horses for me throughout the year, well, then how can I repay them? You know, if we've got us a decent horse program, what do next year's cells look like? What horses can we put in those cells? And then what can I pay these guys to basically get those horses ready to be in that cell? Do we wait until that horse meets the cell and then pay them a commission? And then that gives that guy the ability to put in the work without having to front any cash and then turn around and get something back for it. I can kind of talk about my personal experience and my husband's personal experiences. Working for the people that we've worked for, we've been afforded the opportunity to basically, I don't wanna say not have a cap on how many horses we have, um, but I do some higher end ranch horse stuff. So, if I'm afforded 10 or 12 head of horses, and my husband can go ride them, and he's riding 70 or 100 miles a week. There's seasons where I'm riding right beside him, 70, 100 miles a week. Well, then that allows us to also be able to create decent horses that can go on into, go on to the public and be decent citizens, and then we can pocket some of that money in return. In the ranch, all they did was offer pen space or water or whatever. And I think that that's really important when we're looking at job postings. And I just am using the horse situation as just an example. But employers need to have a realistic expectation of, okay, well, we're only allowing 2 horses. Well, you're hiring a family, a husband and a wife with 2 sons. 2 horses between 4 people doesn't work. 2 horses when the kids are working when they're not in school and the wife is working, periodically through different seasons, 2 horses isn't going to work. That's just one example. I mean, we could look at other things such as like a calf crop percentage or like your heifer development shares and stuff like that. But I feel like the horse deal is probably a pretty broad thing that a lot of people can kind of relate to.
So I'm looking back to, again, your Facebook is Arrow M Cattle Company, and I'm looking back to a post that you made on February 12th, which the opening line is, "Ever wonder why talking about pay and ranching feels like blasphemy?" And we'll talk about that more as we kind of close out the show today. But I wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of these numbers again. So I'm going to read out of 2 paragraphs out of this. You see, across the Mountain West and Northern Plains, a realistic structure for an experienced independent ranch hand commonly lands around $3,500 to $3,750 per month, plus housing, utilities, retirement, insurance, and workers' comp, a ranch truck and trailer, and beef or a grocery stipend. If horses are required, 2 to 5 head are often fully covered. That's feed, hay, farrier, annual vet care, and job-related injuries. Calving and weaning bonuses are common, and when they're offered up front, they need to be honored. Trust erodes quickly when incentives disappear at payout time. And then that entry level or unskilled hires generally start lower, often in that $2,200 to $2,800 range. And that's because they require more training and more supervision. And so, Rachel, as we've talked previously on this podcast, especially about interns and apprentices, those are some of like what we're addressing here. These are the entry level or the unskilled hires for interns, and then apprentices have a level up on that. Do you have any range or suggestions for folks, or even can kind of like tier in how those folks would get paid compared to the ones that we're talking about here with McKenzie?
Yeah, that's a great question, Haley. And I will be the first to say that there is a huge range in what the hosts pay interns within this program. So, a point of clarification, interns coming through the Dan Scott Ranch Management Program are employees of their host ranch. Their host ranch sets the wage. We do that to ensure that there's not any kind of competition. God forbid that they've had an employee that's been there for 10 years and I have a wage set at an intern at 2,500 or something, and it comes in higher than what they've been paying the guy that's been there for a long time. So we let the ranches set their wage. And I'll be honest, the majority of ranches are at the low end of that 2,200 or even less than that. And what I have experienced is that the lower paying ranches are generally my better hosts because they are compensating, they're making up for that reduction in that financial input with really pouring into that student and investing in them from transfer of learning and transfer of knowledge. I will be the first to say I do not believe in an unpaid internship. I think that that is a big mistake. I think that people only value what they pay for. And if they are not paying anything for that individual, then they're not going to be valuing them in the same way. I've put on too many events through MSU Extension and others to see that that free event often doesn't attract as many people as the one that they have to pay some sort of a registration for because they got a little skin in the game, right? But I also truly believe that there is value. And as McKenzie was talking about, the increase in pay as you become an experienced versus an inexperienced employee. So there's definitely a monetary value in the education that those young people are getting in an internship or an apprentice position. And so just being aware that making sure that in my case, I want students to have a livable wage. I don't want them to incur a ton of debt while they're doing that internship. But I have found that the ones who have a little bit lower on the end are really expecting to spend more time with that student and that costs them employee time and it can cost them productivity. And so they're being realistic about that. And then the ones that are paying on that upper end, it's almost more of a transactional relationship with them. They're really wanting to get that full day's work for the full day's pay. And that doesn't always allow for them to slow down, to go back and to show somebody how to do something, to spend that extra time with them. But again, those internships are really short term. Ours are only 3 months. So when you're talking about a wage of $1,800 a month, say, which is um, pretty common, that's not for a 3 month time period. That's different than putting somebody on that for a really long term time. And they're single, they're in college, housing is provided for them too, and generally a lot of other perks, perhaps.
I talk about bonuses because a lot of my life I have lived on doing sales and getting commission on sales with a very low base pay. And then, that's kind of the gravy that you can work harder for and make it pay. And so I feel like bonuses are maybe one of the places that some operations can look at rewarding a good employee. And especially right now, I don't know about you guys, but in my area, bum calves at the stockyards are bringing, $1,000. It is insane. So it's not hard to think of a bonus that needs to correlate to somebody that has live calves on the ground. McKenzie, what other bonuses are out there that you have seen that you think are good ideas for ranches?
I really like the calving bonus, but I also really like the weaning bonus. The weaning bonus, I feel like creates a culture around doing a good job. Anybody, I don't want to say anybody. Let me take that back. Let me take that back. A lot of people can get a calf on the ground, but how many can you get all the way through weaning? And then I've also seen it where there's not technically a name for it, but where like a preconditioning bonus. Okay. So like here, all of our calves go straight to the feed yard. They don't go through a cell barn. So what does weaning need to look like? And then between weaning and the time that they get shipped to the feed yard, what is that going to look like? Are they going to crash on us? Are we going to have to pour a lot of money into them with, you know, drugs and such? Or are they gonna rock on, be fine because we created a low stress environment, did our job correctly, and then they went on to the feed yard and still didn't have any kind of issues, you know? So there's several different things, and I feel like it's kinda like a stair stepper, calving, weaning, and then maybe even a backgrounding type bonus. Outside of that, I haven't seen too many other types of bonuses. I've seen all sorts of compensation packages or ways to buy in and ways to like basically get put your own skin in the game. But those would probably be the three biggest ways as far as bonuses go.
So, Mackenzie, I know we could talk to you for a very long time, but I want to respect all of our time here today and the listener too, and try to not let this go for an hour and a half today. But one of the things that I know for a ranch our size, and we're Northeast Montana, we're running around 300 head of cattle in drought conditions right now. We could run a little bit more, but I am now the primary ranch manager on our place, and I am feeling awful guilty about giving myself a $12,000 annual salary because this is just not the way I was raised, and the house is paid for and the utilities are paid for. No ranch vehicle. We were raised to be lean in agriculture for a lot of folks. Rachel's talked about on this podcast. That's why she's in academia. She was raised by lean parents that didn't really persuade her to go back into agriculture because of that. So as we're talking about these compensations for people, this is hard for me as a rancher to think about ever stomaching paying for somebody. Not that they're not worth it, not that I don't need the help, but we've never treated ourselves that well. So bridge that gap for me a little bit and right now cattle markets are so nice that we can kind of fund some of this and we can make it cash flow still, but there's still that part of us in ag that's waiting for the other shoe to drop. So kind of connect those thoughts for me.
So I think right now we are seeing a mass exodus in agriculture. We're seeing a lot of kids, I say kids, but young adults that are graduating high school, going into their college careers, and they have seen their parents live lean. throughout their entire life. They have seen their parents not go on vacation. They've seen their parents give up the things that they need. And essentially, they don't wanna do the same thing. They were like, "Well, I don't wanna work until I'm 75, 80 years old." In fact, I had a commenter yesterday. She was like, "Well, what is retirement? We're all all gonna work until the day that we're gone." And I'm like, "Well, yes." Like, that's kind of the culture surrounding agriculture and ranching. But I think I'm trying not to get off on too much of a tangent here to, be respectful of everybody's time, but basically, I think that because of that, we do need to start paying ourselves a little bit better. I do think that we need to look at family time a little bit more. We do need to look at what surrounds our employees' family and their circumstances and what they require. And I say that I want the employer, the managers, to be careful. I don't want them to say, "Okay, well, I need to let this employee have X amount of time off, so I'm gonna pick up their slack." You've gotta take care of yourself as well. You've gotta take care of yourself financially, you've gotta take care of yourself mentally, physically, emotionally, and if you don't, then there's not gonna be anything left in your cup to give. So, that looks different for everybody, you know? Whether it's more time with your kids, whether it's time to go ride your horse or, go hang out with your girlfriends or whatever, whatever fills your cup. I think we need to start understanding that, yes, we all live and die by what agriculture truly means, but it's ultimately the way our parents did it, it's not sustainable.
Just want to thank Mackenzie for being here and for talking through this. I think we could go on for another hour, honestly. We didn't hardly dive into profit sharing models, but I think that's a whole nother episode that you could to think about, how we adequately compensate people. And I think we've talked all about it. I'm not sure we've come up with a complete answer for how we work through that, treating everybody fairly, paying people what they're worth, paying ourselves what they're worth. That was a great question, Haley, about how sometimes what we're paying other people is a reflection of how we're valuing ourselves and our time. And neither one of those are fair assessments of it. But it's just comes back to at the end of the day, it's a low profit margin business. And so, how do we find creative ways to take care of the people that are so important to us in this business without them and without them being good employees and really paying attention and giving of themselves? We can't be profitable. And so, how do we balance that at the end of the day? I think that's still a little bit of something that is up to everybody to come up with what way works for them the best, whether that is cash or whether that is a profit sharing model or bonuses or whatever else that looks like at the end of the day. I don't know if Mackenzie has anything to add to that or not.
I really think it just boils down to the individual and the region in which you live in because ranching is not a cookie cutter industry and you have to be really honest with yourself. You've got to be really honest whether you're an employer or an employee, either side of the fence, and you have to be able to see the other's point of view as well. Like, it just is not cookie cutter. Every situation is different, and every family is different.
I tell my students, Mackenzie, when they're going out to start negotiating for their jobs, I said, really, it's such an individual process that I can't tell you what to say. So the best thing that I can do is for yourself, and if you have a significant other in the picture, sit down with them and talk about what are your non-negotiables. And if you can walk into that conversation, understanding these are the things that we have to be successful there and be respectful of that other side, then I think it can be a work out your own agreement and that can look very different for people. And it's not the same type of thing as saying, oh, I started at X salary with the corner office and this money benefits and this many vacation days. It's really what is important to you in your life And how do you value that? And where do you draw the line on what is not negotiable for you?
Absolutely. All right. Well, McKenzie, any last thoughts? Anything that we didn't come to today that you think is important? Please plug your Facebook post, where people can find you, or your Facebook page, where people can find you. Let's get you a few more thousand followers.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Like I said, I'm not very good at the speaking part, but I do write a lot. With anybody that kind of wants to know who I am, what I'm about, they're welcome to go follow me on Arrow M Cattle Company. I try to share different things that are personal. I try to share different things within the industry. I try to connect employers and employees and consumers to producers and anything and everything. If people want to go check that out, I'd be highly grateful and keep talking about it. Like, let's stop tucking these things away and making it taboo. We need to have these conversations, even if they're awkward and uncomfortable.
There you go. Make it uncomfortable. Thanks to McKenzie Rojas for joining us and bringing some honesty to a conversation that this industry really needs to keep having. If you found value in today's episode, make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you are listening so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you take just a minute to leave us a rating or a review, it really does help more folks in agriculture find these conversations. You can also share this episode with a friend, a coworker, or anyone navigating these same questions around ranch work and compensation. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time on the Ranch Workforce Project.